This is a bit older, but back in 2014, I was a studying wildlife biologist specializing in amphibian research. I had spent many years around that time wading through swamps in the southeast part of the states, documenting different species and population densities. What I'm about to share is something that happened to me on one of those research trips that still confounds me to this day. Now, I will say, being a biologist/scientist, I've always approached supernatural things with skepticism. I believe most have some kind of rational explanations. Misidentified known animals, environmental changes, or illnesses that cause creatures and wildlife, and even plants, to adapt to survive. And the rest, I just held on to them being good old-fashioned tall tales. And when it comes to swamps especially, you were bound to hear some kind of legend about them any time they were brought up. Anyway, on this particular trip, we had a research team of 5 that consisted of 2 graduate students, myself and a girl named Stacy, one of our professors and mentors named Jerry, and a local guide named Calvin who knew the area like the back of his hand. We were there to survey a potential new species of a salamander, and I was pretty stoked for it. Obviously, I love marine biology, but salamanders were one of my favorite little guys to study, and the ones that we were after were primarily nocturnal, so we would be doing this at night. The first 2 nights passed uneventfully at that. We collected some specimens, took some water samples, and recorded a lot of data. We even found time to have some fun with it all too. Calvin was a hoot, and showed us different plants and different uses they had. He told us stories of things that he and his little brother did as a kid in similar swamps, and we all laughed and enjoyed the time together. But on our 3rd night, things started to change. We went deeper in the swamp than we had ventured previously, hoping to have better chances at seeing these salamanders. The water was darker there, almost black, and by the high concentration of tannins from the vegetation in the water decomposing. And the massive trees lining the swamps only made it that much more intimidating. Being out there in the dark surrounded by those trees, it can really put in perspective how small you really are in our vast world. That's why I love what I do. It was probably around 2 a.m. when we had split into 2 pairs to cover more ground. I was with Calvin and Stacy went with Jerry. We were probably about 50 yards apart in different channels, but still within earshot of each other. Calvin and I were standing in a waist-deep water, headlamps on, scanning the surface for movement, when I noticed it became unnaturally quiet. In the swamps, there is literally always noise. Frog calling, insect chirping, maybe even the occasional splash of fish or turtles, but suddenly there was nothing except the soft sound of water moving around us as we moved. I had stopped moving when I noticed it, and shortly after I stopped, Calvin did the same. After looking both ways and behind him, he groaned and said, "Nah, something ain't right." He scanned the waters with his flashlight, quickly but also with determination. That's when we heard it. A strange vocalization that I still struggle to describe accurately. It wasn't the hiss of an alligator or a snapper, or the call of any amphibian that I've ever heard of personally or read about or studied. The closest comparison I've ever come to, and this is with the help of others that were out there that night, was of a rusty door hinge slowly being opened. But at the same time, it was a lot deeper. Maybe slowed down with a vibrato quality that seemed to resonate through the water itself. I could literally feel it through my boots and waders in my feet. When I heard it, I immediately looked at Calvin. He was familiar with this area. Surely he would know, or at least make me feel more comfortable with the situation. But looking over at him, he had frozen in place. I tried asking what that was, and he slowly shook his head and demanded that we get back to the boat at once, his voice very serious and tight. Before I could react, we heard splashing from the direction of Stacy and Jerry, followed by Stacy screaming. We immediately started towards them, struggling to get through the thick mud. When we rounded a bend in the channel, we saw both of them scrambling to get back toward us. Their headlamps on, but Jerry was completely wet and covered in mud. Jerry started saying something about feeling something on his leg, but stopped mid-sentence as a massive displacement of water surged from behind them. It was as if something large had submerged suddenly, but what could it have been? Unfortunately, in a swamp, there were a few possibilities, and none of them were good for us. Calvin and I helped the other two across, Jerry being a little frazzled and Stacy a smaller and now terrified woman, and we all got back into our small research boat. Once aboard, Stacy and Jerry began explaining what happened. Stacy said that she saw a dark shape moving through the water, but became nervous by the size. This isn't the first time I had done something like this with Stacy. She wasn't the type to be nervous about getting in knee-deep swamp waters. She was, however, concerned by the size of whatever was below the surface. Her first thought was an alligator, but she said the movement pattern was all wrong. Gators create a distinctive wake when swimming, and she said the way the shape submerged with the precision it didn't match either. Jerry also mentioned the shape was far too elongated, especially where the neck would be, and the movements were too fluid, almost serpentine in motion. Stacy also said that when the light caught it briefly, she could make out what looked like ridges or plates running down its back. I asked them if it could possibly have been an alligator gar, which can get pretty big and have armored scales, but Jerry shook his head no, saying that it moved wrong, too fluid. But then he also explained why Stacy screamed and why he was covered in mud. While they were looking around, Jerry said he felt something grab onto his leg, explaining how it felt just like a hand, like individual fingers wrapping around his leg, and then pulled his leg forward, causing him to fall and startling Stacy. With all of us confused and, to be frank, a little disturbed, we decided to end the night's research early and return to our field station. I was still fairly new to this kind of stuff, but seeing Jerry and Calvin obviously on edge made the whole thing worse. I remember Calvin using the boat's spotlight, sweeping it across the water behind us, clearly looking or watching for something. I asked him, since he was from the area, if he had any suggestions on what they could have seen, and he shook his head, and just didn't say anything for the rest of the ride. He didn't need to say anything, though. The look on his face spoke volumes. The next morning, we went back out there to check on our equipment, when I discovered that one of our underwater field cameras, which we had left recording overnight in the area, was now missing. What's worse was that the cable that had it secured to the tree had been severed. And that cable was stainless steel. It wasn't frayed or broken, but cut cleanly like with a sharp object. When I brought this information back to the others, Jerry had a look of confusion, where Calvin was not having it whatsoever. He started talking about how there were all kinds of rumors about the swamps out there, how there was something living in them that's been there for years. I myself was curious, especially with what we experienced the night before. He said that his father had witnessed something similar when he was younger, and so did his nephew, saying he actually got part of it on camera. He described what the thing looked like when he saw it rise from the waters. He said that it was bigger than a fishing boat, serpentine in shape, with a very long body, but when the front half breached the water, it had very thick plates across its back and long arms. Imagine a snake with thick scales like a turtle, but much larger, and give that snake arms. If I heard this from anyone else, I would think it was someone describing something that a child had drawn. It sounded comical, but the look on Calvin's eyes told me that he was not messing around. This was real, and this was something he witnessed. Stacy was already on edge, but Calvin wanted nothing to do with the area that we were in. He suggested some other areas of the swamp, and after Jerry being grabbed, I think he was just as willing to move on. We moved our research area to a different part of the swamp, and we actually had better results. There was no issue with the sounds of the swamp disappearing, and no unsettling vibes either. I don't know if it was related or not, but there was a divide where the water was cut off, basically splitting it into two parts. Maybe whatever that thing was can't completely breach the water and therefore only sticks to that side. I've tried to do a lot of research on what that thing could have been. I looked up uncommon and rare sightings of creatures in those same swamps, but nothing matches the description or even the size of the thing. I'm sharing this with you because I have had people completely serious tell me that it could be some kind of lizard man, but it wasn't even human-shaped. The closest thing to a human was that it had arms, but the size was massive, and it had matching scales or plates to match. To this day, it is still something that confounds me on a scientific level, but the sheer size of it, and the fact that it pulled Jerry under, makes me think that this thing was not happy with us being there, and we were quite clearly inferior compared to it. These are the things that remind me of just how much is out there that we don't know about, that we don't see or understand, and, to be honest, I'm okay with it staying that way. This actually happened to me last winter, and I have no idea what it was that I saw. I'm a nurse, and basically I take care of patients from their own home. It might be someone who is just homebound due to a temporary illness or injury, but I've also been there for hospice care jobs too. One of the reasons I do this, and chose this, is because I kind of live in the middle of nowhere kind of town in Pennsylvania. It's a bit of a drive no matter where you go, but I drive a Jeep that gets around really well and holds all of my supplies. It's a truly rewarding job, knowing I can come to patients instead of them having to risk the drive or even find one just to get to the closest hospital that's half an hour away in any direction. Anyway, I know I'm not here to talk about my job, so I'll move on, but I just wanted to explain why I'm driving around late at night. It was about midnight, a little past, and I was heading back home after a shift at this sweet old man's house. He lived in a rural area surrounded by nothing but trees, and the closest neighbor was a few miles away. The winding back roads cut through just as many trees with spotty cell service and barely any streetlight. Those are the times where I'm cruising with my brights on for most of the drive, until that one random car pops up. I've taken this road many times, so I'm both used to it and the wildlife that I would see. Deer, foxes, sometimes raccoons, and the occasional coyote. I make it home each night because I drive carefully, especially when driving these kinds of roads late at night. Deer are always a serious hazard. I only had about 15 to 20 minutes left of my drive and the snow was starting to accumulate on the road, but thankfully it wasn't slick yet. The part of the road that I was on at that point was pretty much a straight shot, hardly any curves but slightly downhill, giving me the advantage of seeing what's coming up. That's when I spotted something near the bottom of the hill. First reaction, driving at night on these roads, I knew it had to be some kind of wildlife. But then I did a double take. It wasn't walking on all four, but rather on two. It also looked generally humanoid in shape, and from the distance I was at, they looked really tall too. But it wasn't just that they looked tall. They looked 7 to 8 feet tall, and they were extremely thin, like unnaturally proportioned. And all this made me pay more attention and realize that its movements were all wrong. It's hard to explain in writing, and I'm a nurse. It didn't walk like a person or any animal that I could think of. Its movements were more jerky, almost like it had stop-motion animation, but in real life. To be honest, I had to slow down and blink a few times to make sure my eyes weren't having issues. Each step it took, it seemed to cover more distance than one might think it should. Once I got closer, the thing stopped in the middle of the road and turned toward my car, But this is where it gets worse. Its proportions made no sense. The arms went down to its knees, and its legs seemed to bend slightly backwards, like a bird. But the creepiest part to me was its face. It was flat, like a human, but it made no sense. Those pictures you see where the face looks photoshopped or pinched smaller and inward, that's what it looked like. The eyes, nose, and I think its mouth were all nearly dead center of its face, and the rest was just plain skin. It had no hair, it looked like it was bald, which also helped me notice they didn't have ears either. The side of its head was flat, no ears in sight. I was in shock as I stopped my car entirely about 20 feet in front of it. I didn't want to get too close, but I was still curious enough to stick around. For a few seconds, it just stayed as it was, not moving. It didn't even look like it was breathing. Then it started moving again, and I was overcome with this dread that was so intense that I started crying. It bent forward at the waist until its head was almost touching the ground, but its legs remained straight. It stayed in this position for a second, and then straightened up and twisted its torso around what looked almost to be 180 degrees without moving its legs. They stayed facing forward the entire time. Then, in 3 large steps, it walked over to the side of the road and jumped into the trees. It stopped right on the edge to where I could still see it, like it was letting me drive past, maybe? I just couldn't bring myself to move. I probably waited 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and then I finally thought I was doing something smart. I reached for my phone, thinking I could still get a partial picture of this thing in the trees, but as soon as my camera pulled up and started zooming in, I watched the thing bend back down and take off with incredible speed deeper into the trees. I did snap a picture, but when I looked at it, all I could see was trees and darkness. I couldn't even make out a slight blur of where this thing was standing. It was gone too fast. I waited there for another minute or two, with my high beams on, waiting to see if it was going to come back. Thankfully, I think, it never did. I put my car back in drive and drove probably 15 miles per hour for a little while, watching the tree line to see if it would come back. With how terrified that thing made me, I was worried that it would come running out and jump on the car or break a window or something. When I got home, I was still a bit shaky, but the crying did stop. At first I told myself maybe I was just being emotional and felt bad for whatever that thing was, but then I remembered that sense of dread that I felt watching it. I was terrified. Something about that thing instilled pure fear in me. Something telling me that I should not have been there and that I should not have seen that thing. Since then, I have told a few people about it that would care, and I've gotten mixed responses. Some tried to come up with explanations. A sick deer, maybe a human with deformities, but it was the feeling of the atmosphere. The feeling in that moment that didn't feel real. So maybe someone might hear my story and know what I may have seen. Maybe they've had a similar experience, and can help me understand what I saw, or at least tell me that I'm not alone, because I cannot stop thinking about this thing. I still take the roads regularly, sometimes even at night, and I do catch myself looking through the trees, expecting this thing to be there, watching me from the distance. If you have a strange or scary story you want to hear on the podcast, send it in to astheravendreams.com. Hi, Raven. Longtime listener, love the podcast. My story happened about 2 years ago. I'm afraid of flying, but have a love of cruises, but being from Michigan, that means we take a lot of cross-country trips by car. When we take these trips, we leave about 5 p.m., so my 2 kids will be asleep for the bulk of it. We mostly drive when it's dark out. Now, a little background. My friend passed away at the beginning of February after hitting black ice on the highway, and this story happened within a week of the anniversary of her death. so I requested that we take back roads until we were out of the snow and ice, as it's a huge phobia of mine now. No biggie. We drove until we were out, and then when we tried to switch the GPS to highways, it just kept taking us on back roads. We thought maybe the GPS was bad because we were in the middle of nowhere, so we stopped at a McDonald's. Still no luck. We kept trying to no avail. At around 3 a.m., in the middle of West Virginia, it was just me and my boyfriend awake. He was driving. All of a sudden, to his left, I spot what I can only describe as what ectoplasm would look like, but it's massive. There were these two shapes floating within the trees, almost moving how a mermaid swims, or like a fish. I kept staring and said nothing. Moments later, my boyfriend asked me if I saw it too. I confirmed that we saw the same things, but when we looked back, they were both gone. There were no houses for miles, so we eliminated the possibility of a fire, plus it definitely wasn't smoke. We both had a sense of dread and kept quiet for about 5 minutes. Finally, the GPS was magically taking us to the highway entrance, despite having given up on trying an hour before. Once we were safely off this really creepy back road, we brought it up again. I tried Googling the cryptids it could be, or really any explanation, to no avail. What's weirder is we were taking stops along the way to spots where cryptids had been seen. Or we were going to until that happened. We got to Miami as fast as we could and didn't talk about it again. We still don't, because even talking to each other about it makes us both nervous and on edge. A year later, I finally told someone else about it, my friend, because I knew she wouldn't think we were crazy. She did find a Reddit post that described the same thing, moving like a fish and all, but that's it. I've never been able to find anything else like it. The strangest part to me was how it was like we were supposed to see it. We couldn't get off that road until after we saw whatever it was that we saw. I still have dreams about it, but thankfully haven't had another encounter. And we don't take the back roads ever anymore. Not a lot of strange things have happened to me, but this one was for sure one that I'll never forget. Thanks for letting me submit this. It feels good to finally tell someone else. I'm just glad to get it off my chest. So, this is going to be a little different than some cryptid stories you've read before, but it was still something that happened to me that I wanted to share with you. I've been a photographer for many years, primarily focusing on landscapes. I've done this independently and for myself, and I've taken them for clients, and I've also been contracted to take photos for surveyors. I've been all over the US, but my favorite place to photograph is the American Southwest. It actually got me to move to New Mexico for that reason too. I've witnessed and captured dust storms that made midday look like night, flash floods that make new canyons in minutes, and those calm, gorgeous sunsets that paint the sky in colors that most photos never could quite capture, even with the most advanced equipment. But something happened to me back in 2021 during a trip to Utah that defies any natural explanation that I've been able to find. I was planning on checking out a national park that I hadn't visited before. I was planning on exploring part of a less visited area due to it being so isolated, and to be honest, less eventful for a normal tourist attraction. There weren't any places to stop for a picnic, not much shade either. The climb was steep, and it probably looked a bit plain to the normal person, but I loved the vast openness of those canyons. I registered my planned route with a ranger as required. That way they knew where I would be, but otherwise, I would be entirely alone. I was a good way through my trek, and had spent hours already taking photos of everything from different angles. Mood shots, all of it. As the sun moved across the sky, casting shadows on rocks and sandstone, I took more photos as the shadows were creating new views that I loved. The idea that you could only witness these shots at specific times of day, and that I could capture these moments, made me excited. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice the light beginning to fade until the shadows had grown long enough to swallow the canyon floor. When I realized that I was still a few hours away from a good stopping place, I quickly packed up my gear. But as I packed up, I saw some of the sand moving oddly along the canyon floor. Now, if you've spent time in the desert, you know that sand shifts constantly from the wind, forming ripples and patterns at time. It was almost like that, but at the same time, different. A lot different. It was more deliberate, almost purposeful. It was like small streams of sand were converging and moving around the slight breeze that was flowing through the canyon. I watched as those same streams gathered into formations that suspiciously looked human-sized but narrower, with elongated proportions. There were 3 of them, composed entirely of swirling sand particles that somehow maintained their form despite the impossibility of the whole thing. I stood in awe of what I was seeing. I tried to come up with an explanation, too. Maybe it was due to the wind catching the pillars and boulders, causing the sand to form like that. Maybe I was dehydrated and just seeing things. Unfortunately, it had me so transfixed that I had totally forgotten about grabbing my camera to capture the sight. That was until it appeared that they were moving toward me. Not walking exactly, but flowing across the ground while still maintaining their vaguely humanoid shapes. I backed away, now trying to pull out my camera. I was in awe when I first saw these things, but I finally came to and started fumbling with my bag to set up the camera. Because, of course, as we photographers do, we document first, run later. I managed to take several quick shots before turning to make my way out of the canyon. Between it getting later and darker in Utah, I knew that could get dangerous. Not to mention, whatever these things were closing in. The path ahead required climbing up a steep sandstone slope to reach the rim, and I was about halfway up when I messed up. I had gripped onto a seemingly solid protrusion of rock when it crumbled beneath my fingers. Time seemed to be in slow motion as I felt myself begin to fall back, with nothing to stop my fall. It wasn't too steep of a fall, as in I wouldn't have died, but I would probably be severely injured. I watched as my camera bag pointed straight down, pulling me with it. Most disturbingly, the sand formations suddenly raced toward me with impossible speed. My first reaction was to throw one arm up to protect my face, closing my eyes as I braced for impact. But instead of hitting the ground, I felt something grasp my right arm with surprising strength, yanking it upward. The force jolted my bag loose, and I heard it tumble to the ground. Yet I remained suspended, one arm held firmly by something. I looked down with disappointment at my bag, but then it dawned on me that something caught me or had grabbed me. There was nothing around that I could have been snagged on either. That's when I looked up and found myself dangling from the ledge, my right arm extended upward at an uncomfortable angle. Sand swirled around my wrist and forearm. It wasn't solid. I could see right through it, but it wasn't insubstantial either. Then, I swear I felt something pulling me up until I could grab onto another ledge with my other hand. And at that moment, my right arm was freed. I put my foot on a solid piece of rock and pulled myself the rest of the way up. I sat on the ground and looked around as I watched the sand formation in front of me disperse into the air. After taking a moment to collect myself, I remembered my camera and crawled to the ledge to look over. There at the bottom, I saw my bag next to more sand. It wasn't moving, just maintaining its position as if waiting for something. I don't know why I did this, but I said out loud, "Please don't let it be broken. Don't let something or someone snatch it up before I can get to it." I found a better path down, as I scooted down it on my bottom. Once on the same level, I slowly made my way to my camera bag. I saw that sand figure still lingering nearby, so I slowly reached for my bag. And once again said out loud, "I'm just gonna reach down and grab this." As I got closer, I swear the sand moved, and I grabbed my bag, and then went back to my spot that I had scooted down and crawled back up. Once back to the top, on solid ground, I regained my composure and started making my way through the trail. But before I left that area, I heard a voice. It was warped, almost like someone trying to talk underwater. I couldn't tell what was said, but I knew that there were words. Something was talking, or trying to. And with the voice, I saw another sand figure in the distance. The disembodied voice did it for me. Putting that with the sand then led me to the conclusion that these things were living, and I couldn't really explain that. I held on to my bag and I ran. I didn't stop. I ran until I reached one of the rest buildings. This one was unmanned, but it had restrooms, a drinking fountain, and some vending machines. I sat on one of the benches to catch my breath. After about 10 minutes or so, I told myself that I needed to get going. It was going to be dark quickly, and I wasn't planning on camping, nor did I have any camping supplies, so I had to get back to the entrance. Thankfully, I can get into the right mindset and get done what I needed to, so I got back to the entrance probably in record time. This entire time, however, I was in a sort of trance, kind of just going through the motions. I was even on autopilot as I drove back to the hotel. Once there, I undressed, preparing to take a cold shower, when I noticed how sensitive my arm felt when my shirt touched it. I looked down and saw that my right wrist and lower arm was red and sensitive to the touch. It was like it had been rubbed raw by something rough. A rock, maybe, or sandpaper. It's like it all came rushing back to me at that moment. I went back to my camera and tried to turn it on, and it wouldn't. I opened the back compartment where the rechargeable batteries and SD card was, and to my surprise, sand fell out of it and onto the desk. The camera was in a case, and in my camera bag. The bag had a few camera lenses, sunscreen, my sunglasses, and a few other small items in it. So how could it have been filled with sand? That's when I noticed the lenses were completely scuffed. They weren't cracked, but once again, it looked like something rough had been rubbed across them. I couldn't make sense of how that was even possible. I could see it being cracked from the fall, maybe the plastic even being chipped or damaged, but to have full scuffs like that, similar to how my wrist now was, it made no sense to me. Until I remembered the sand figures. Could that even be possible? Were those things really alive? And did they save me? Is that what had a hold of my arm? I mean, with the weird rash or whatever it was on my arm, it's the only thing I could think of. So maybe they tried to save my camera too? I left the hotel the next day. It was supposed to be a simple trip, so I went home eagerly wanting to check the memory card in my camera since it wouldn't power on. Thankfully it did work, but the photos were underwhelming to say the least. There were my initial photos that came out fine, but closer to the last photo, they weren't normal, nor were they something I would normally take. Some had dark spots on them, like there were shadows on very specific parts of the pictures. And closer to the end of them, they became pretty fuzzy, like a photo I took on my first camera phone. But how was that even possible? This was an expensive Canon camera. I didn't have a filter to make photos look like that. It didn't make sense. Something was eating at me that my wrist and camera and lenses and the photos all had to be related to those sand figures. I started looking into it, searching online some about sand figures, but for the most part, all I kept getting was info about some little-known indie film about ghost figures that could control the wind around them. Sand, dirt, trees, leaves, just things like that. There was a brief snippet claiming it was based on a true legend, but then I couldn't even find information on what they claimed to be in the movie. So I'm at a loss. Something was out there that day with me, and contrary to what I'm used to with cryptids or unidentified creatures, it didn't seem to be afraid of me or want to hurt me. In fact, it saved me. It saved me from a potential awful injury. And to be honest, I'm thankful for it. I just had a raw arm for about a week, but I got a good cream that helped. I do want to go back and see, while better prepared, if I can get better photos or maybe a video of it at the risk of my camera. Unfortunately, life does what it does, and I haven't had the time or money to go back out there. But when I do, mark my word, I will share anything I come across. In the meantime, I would love to hear if anyone has heard of these creatures and what they mean or their purpose, and why I was chosen to be saved. First of all, this is my first post, so it's not going to be great, and I'm not an author, but let's get into it. I'm a 23-year-old male, and me and my friend were walking through town at 7 or 8, and weird things had started happening, and we just weren't feeling right. About a mile from my house, we heard a blood-curdling screech, and we stopped and started looking around. My friend said, "Hey, we need to go now." And as he said this, we both started running, and we heard this screech again. My friend and I started into a full sprint, and afterwards, I got home, and my friend refused to tell me what he saw. I hope that you like this, as I'm shaking while writing it, so sorry if it's a little sloppy, and I love the podcast. Well, thank you. So that, my friends, was a collection of some cryptid encounter stories. I get asked to do these a lot, and I do get a decent amount of them, but I don't get enough to consistently do them. So I do them as I get them. And hopefully that works well for you all. Works well for me. I enjoy the stories, so it's nice to get them as I do. Hopefully you enjoyed the stories. If you did, please do hit that like button, the like on the video. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, do consider subscribing. That'd be amazing of you. You can also go to astheravendreams.com and send your stories in to me if you want to send one in, if you have one, of course. And you can also listen to the podcast on other platforms, such as Pandora, Spotify, Apple, etc. Audible is one of them, too. Let's see. You can also send a comment in. Leave a comment. Not send a... Well, you can send a comment in if you want to. But you can also leave a comment on the video with your thoughts on the stories, or what you want to hear, what you didn't like hearing, so forth and so on. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So, yeah. If you did enjoy the video and want more, do click on the playlists down below in the description, or on my channel. You can go to the podcast or playlist tab. I don't know which one it says, but that'll give you a playlist of videos, and I try to keep them well organized, so a lot to watch there. All that said, friends, hopefully I see you again here very soon, but until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. And until next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.